Look, we pretend that all these problems are far away and we live in this continent that's far isolated from the rest of the world. And of course, we know increasingly that's not true. It's not true because it's become so much cheaper for people to get on a plane, for instance, and to fly to the Americas. Even if you can't get a visa to come to Canada or to the United States, for instance, it's relatively easy to fly to other parts of the Americas, countries such as Brazil, and then simply make your way up up across the continent. There's also, of course, we've put in place lots of mechanisms that have made it much harder for people to come to North America. And so I think as a result of demographic pressures on the one hand and the reduced costs of getting to North America, we're simply going to see more irregular migratory flows to the North American continent in general, and as a result of the last 10 years in the United States of a much more stepped up removal tempo and the United States being much less hospitable, a greater incentive for people to come to Canada. And so on the continent in general, and Canada in particular, we will need to get used to the fact that a growing number of people are simply going to show up on our borders. They're not going to be the people that we necessarily will have picked. And so that on the one hand, I think means we need to think about how as a democratic society we are prepared to deal with individuals who are able to make it to our country because in many cases they are the most physically and economically able, not necessarily the most vulnerable. So being careful about applying our refugee and asylum system in a systematic fashion. And I think there's a lot of lessons here to be learned from Europe because, of course, in Canada, most people could not tell you the difference between an asylum seeker, a refugee, a migrant, a regular or an irregular migrant. And so I think those are categories on which Europe, especially the rule of law regime in Europe, has been much more systematic and consequential in the way that they are applied to make sure we meet our obligations under international law. But at the same time, we understand that not everybody deserves protection. And then we also need to work with our partners across the world, and in particular in Europe, to ensure that the origin countries of migrants simply become more sustainable places to live. Because most people leave not because they really want to leave, they leave because they choose. They don't have much of a choice if they want to make a future for themselves or if they want to survive or live in more sustainable conditions. And so here too, I think we've traditionally taken a more security-based approach in North America, pretending that we can close off the perimeter. And I think there's a lot to be learned from the European approach that has used much more soft power to provide money and build capacity, build capabilities in countries around the European periphery, in the Middle East and in Africa, to have a medium-term strategy of making conditions more sustainable and trying to lift the rest of the world, bring them more up to par, not just economically, but in terms of stability to what the West and Western democracies have to offer. And I mean, what people seek ultimately is opportunities for to live in an orderly, safe, secure society where they can live out freely their religion and they can earn a living, get paid a fair wage, and have an opportunity to take the skills and the motivations they have and put them to work and gain a fair and equitable wage for them. And so these are conditions that we will need to work hard to help create in the rest of the world as well.